Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things magic, flavour design, and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And we are doing our very first in-person record in, like...
a year?
Over a year.
Over a year?
I think it was,
nice.
What was it, episode 27 was the last one.
And we're, 100 and... What are we on now? 100...
118, 119?
Yeah, so nearly a whole 100 episodes in between our personal connection.
Yeah. Hi, buddy.
Hello, buddy. This is going to feel like so much more succinct as well. Like, I feel like our remote recording...
Is it?
It should do.
Look, what was you going? What I'm going to do? I can already see the levels. So, firstly, right, I'm so sorry if this audio is going to sound like garbage because not only is this the first audio record that we've done in person with one mic, and I'm actually going to move this mic closer to you, as was the usual way.
Because you're really loud and I'm really quiet.
Well, yeah, you're just a lot more softly spoken than I am. Although when you're recording in your place, you peak higher than I do, but your general
is slightly lower.
Yeah. Whereas I'm just this big wall of wah.
I'll try not bark laughs into the microphone.
So not only are we doing this, this is going to be a nightmare for me to edit, I can just tell. But also, we're recording on my boat. On my narrow boat.
We're on water.
We're on water. So if there are any sounds of moorhens or indeed people, because we're directly next to the towpath, it's like at the level of our heads because the towpath's higher than the canal. That's why. We are going to be recording in different spaces, and we'll kind of tell you where we are every time we're in a new space. But yeah, for now we're on a boat. So
yeah, new year, new
boat.
New boat, exactly.
But you think this is going to be more succinct, do you?
I think so. I mean, I've looked forward to it ever since because we tried to, like, peek behind the curtain. We tried to do this about a week ago. And the episode we're going to be doing, we'll talk about in a second. We're going to preamble probably for another 10 minutes. But we wanted to get this done ahead of the new year, or at least just directly afterwards. And we tried to fumble together, and it turned out being remote actually has some significant problems sometimes.
My internet absolutely crapped out.
Yeah, and just
sometimes, first time ever.
Yeah, and sometimes just trying to get two different, like, again, like trying to do two remote recordings and having them sync up just sometimes doesn't quite work. Like, in the past we've had like sets, like breaks of five, even like a second break sometimes can like really ruin the flow. Whereas when you're in person, I think like it's a little harder for us to interrupt each other. It's a little easier to kind of go off cues of each other. I also don't have to tab between looking at your face and looking at my notes. Which is nice.
That's true. I think. I'm used to having to, so I edit these, if people didn't know. You know, obviously. These people might not know. I edit them. And not having two separate audio tracks that I can chop and change. The amount of times that I, like, silence you or I and then overlap, like, some audio to make sort of... So you'll say something really pithy, but I'll be going, fucking but planeswalkers suck, or something over the top of it. And your really eloquent line just gets lost in my gubbins, so I will silence me. And then it just seems like, Nathan's made this really pithy point, and Andy reverently listened. Whereas in actuality, that's not the case. You know, things get edited, right? Whereas with this, I think I will backtrack twice, but I think when it's in person, there's less opportunity for that to happen. Now, the backtracks are... I don't know why this has turned into an editing podcast.
It's good, it's nice.
What I will backtrack is I think we'll probably be better at talking. Because when we first did this, even for the first 40 episodes or so, we were either so keen to get our words out, or we just, I don't know, we were probably not the most practiced at it, which we weren't. And secondly, I give a lot less of a crap about the audio quality. Because when lockdown hit, so we started this podcast before lockdown, weirdly, even though it seems like we started in lockdown, but we actually started it before. And so obviously any podcasts that were out there were either super on a shoestring budget like ours was, or incredibly professional because they were in studios and they had like professional editors and all this kind of stuff. And even some of the big magic podcasts would have like, they hired studio space. If you look at like Good Luck High Five, like they have their own studio, like, do you know what I mean, with 2 mics and the command zone and all that kind of stuff. So that was our benchmark to hit. And then when COVID hit and everyone's in lockdown, not only did some of those really big podcasts go into like hiding and like record remotely, but everyone else who was starting immediately had to record remotely, and no one knew how to do that properly.
Yeah, and it was everyone trying to find that comfort, that comfort of professionalism. Essentially, it's like streaming, right? Like you can see that when Twitch streamers finally go from like the couple of dozen viewers to like a couple of hundred, and they can finally afford to set up their space effectively. It's all about kind of like finding finding feet. And it's kind of weird doing this again because I feel like we got to a point of comfort and normality doing it remotely and having our own individual setups, you know. So it's going to be interesting kind of getting back to what's the original setup.
Relearning and like different issues. Like, so we were using Zencaster, and big ups to Zencaster. I know a couple of different podcasts use them. And they really did save a lot of our skins because we tried doing Zoom and it just didn't quite work. And then we landed on Zencaster was our kind of good flow. But that has its own problems, like with downloading different file types. And as like last week, I mean, to be fair, last week was the first time that ever happened. The internet crapped out on my end, so things couldn't happen. But this is different things like, what if I just accidentally stop recording? Like, and then that's the whole one track gone. Or like, what if what if it just doesn't save properly or some shit? I don't know. Like, we're using my boat batteries. Again, we're on my narrow boat, my home that is running off of batteries that runs off the engine. I've got 12.2 volts coming through the Synwave, which is using an inverter to power my 240 volt laptop. So we'll see.
We'll see. If we hadn't cutting out halfway through, then you understand why.
Anyway.
But, right, what are we here to talk about?
2022, baby!
Exactly.
We're only 2 weeks late.
Yeah, well, again, for circumstances notwithstanding, I think we were going to be a touch late regardless. And it's kind of interesting because we had like a setup to do a year in review episode and then also do a looking to the year ahead. But as is the way with WotC, they've bungled their spoiler season by accidentally leaking their entire March of Machines Reshi into Dominaria Remastered pack. So everybody knows half the set now. So it's a lot harder to be like, oh, I wonder what's happening now with this character. And it's like, oh well, we already know. There's no speculation anymore. It's now confirmation. So we're going to probably worry about that next week because we're hitting story as well this week. So we'll probably have a better, a more grounded and less speculative perspective on what's happening with Phyrexia from in next episode. Whereas we still need to kind of talk about last year.
Yeah.
And all of the shit that happened.
It was a big year.
It was a huge year. And I remember saying this, and there's going to be a few times today where I'm going to be like, oh, I said this last time. And this is because we got about a third of the way through the episode before we realised we couldn't continue.
Oh, man.
So a few bits are going to be retreads, a few bits are going to be refumbles. But I remember thinking, and even now, like, I had to recheck, I nearly missed Nuka Penna when I was kind of looking back at what sets actually came out this year.
Did you?
Yeah, of all of the ones, for some reason I couldn't think of the one that came between Kamigawa and Dominaria United, just off the top of my head in the moment. And I don't know why, because I really like Nuka Penna.
Everyone liked Nuka Penna.
But I feel like this is the problem in general. I feel like the first set of the year has a bit of time to breathe, and everything else has been kind of a little bit condensed. And I feel like this is probably eponymous of the whole releasing too much product, jumping set by set to different planes and different storylines. And in retrospect, I think it worked, and I'll talk about that towards the end when we kind of look at Phyrexia and the build up to it. But each set kind of has that flash in the pan moment. And I feel like Nuka Penna, because we did Kamigawa as such this crazy reinvention, and then we went back to Dominaria and it had this return of the Phyrexians. You have these two kind of reinventions, and tucked in the middle there's this new place, this Art Deco plane. And I don't know why, for me, I guess it just didn't quite hold and resonate as much. But then again, looking back at it, I still think it was a fantastic set. So
that's so interesting.
And of all of them, I don't know why.
All right, okay. Well, let's kick off the year. Let's start where we started the year, which was still in Innistrad, technically.
Yeah, the double feature.
Do we need to talk about that?
Black and white. No, it's all right.
Yeah, some of the cards look cool in black and white. Most of them look really dull. It was really odd, just even for a product release schedule. In terms of just your mind's eye of looking at different years, it's a really odd thing, and I know it's because it was hit with like transport issues. A lot of these release dates weren't the original release dates, and I can't remember if that was the same for double feature. But from like an optics point of view, and even looking at it from a flavor point of view, again we're a flavor podcast. To end a year on a plane, and then to start the next year, and I know time's arbitrary, but to start the next year still on the plane, but not really.
Yeah.
Kind of weird.
To retread in a really wishy-washy way. I think this is the thing, the biggest complaint people had about Double Feature was that it was supposed to be a cultivated list of cards that got a new treatment, and it kind of felt like a cop-out because I thought it's a similar thing to some of the artist sketch versions, right? Of where... What set did we get that for? The Modern Horizons?
Modern Horizons 2.
Exactly. So a lot of them were cool because it was like, oh, you get to see it, a work in progress. But for some of them, it just kind of felt like, similar to the Doodle Secret Lairs, as much as these kids and their drawings are cute and lovely and everything, it does feel a little bit like a cop-out to put a a not complete drawing on a card that is going to cost essentially the same as the version that has a complete finished product on it. And then
So
again,
you're saying you hate children, is that what you're saying?
not in so many words.
I hate children. I hate children in my Magic game. This is a game for adults and for intelligent beings.
Well, to be fair, like I've Crater Hoof people with the Doodle version of it a couple of times since, because I didn't want to get a Crater Hoof because it felt like a cop out. But then we did some trades for Command Fest Birmingham, and I happened to get the Doodle version, and there's nothing better than doodling out your opponents. So you know, there is a little love in my heart for the style, but I just feel like as a set, double feature just didn't deliver what it promised to be. And then again, the issues of getting hold of it. And then I actually think the border's really, really cool. Like I've got a couple of double feature cards, and I do think it looks really cool. I just think they just didn't quite put enough care and attention for something that's supposed to be like, maybe a celebration of the two sets together. Yeah. Like it just felt like a wishy-washy epilogue.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I kind of like the idea of them doing like real world pastiches on cards in that way, because they're meant to look like old Hammer horror like films, right? They're all kind of black and white style, which is a kind of really weird meta thing when you think about it, because they have done obviously like photorealistic or nearing, well, I suppose fantasy realist paintings of say like Bram Stoker's Dracula for Crimson Vow and whatnot, but to have an actual like movie gloss on these things outside of a secret lair is kind of an interesting idea. It's just the product itself is a flop. So there we go. That was double feature. But then we get to our first set proper. And like if I think of 2021, because I was trying to compare the 2 years, and I think we were quite up on 2021 because things had things like Kaldheim and Strixhaven and all that kind of stuff. And I think most people were like all the sets, and then we ended up in Innistrad. All the sets, like in the kind of general consensus, obviously people are going to hate on them and or really love them either in the scale. But most people, I think, were like 2021 was pretty good. It was like everything was like doing what it said it needed to do. Whereas 2022, if we're looking at the first main set of the year and then as we go on, is a year of huge surprises. As like, oh my god, I can't believe how amazing this was, and massive letdowns.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think Neon Dynasty falls heavily into the massive surprises, right? Yeah,
I mean, I've written here very, very clear. It was a very well done return to what was considered to be an impossible to return to plane. Like people said that, I mean, it was I don't know what the what's it called, the Rabia scale. I don't know where Kamigawa felt on the Rabia scale beforehand, which is the likelihood of returning to said plane, in the same way that the Venser scale is the likelihood of seeing this character on a Planeswalker card. You know, it's one of Mari's things of telling the Magic community, right, you've got all of these things of, is it coming back, is it not coming back? Let me at least give you a scale out of 10 of whether it's going to happen or not. And Kamigawa was very low. It's historically been known to be from a mechanical point of view, a parasitic block. You know, a lot of the mechanics and everything were either underpowered or fed back into each other in a way that didn't allow it to interact with the other sets around it. It had some very, very, very strong outliers, things like Umezawa Jite, for example, that were just broken. And then I think that we've talked about this before, but I had such a love for the original Kamigawa. I didn't really understand why people weren't excited to go back. And I'm so glad they did, because I don't know a single person that wasn't happy with how they managed to hold on to the old school, but then also inject this massive new wave of techno punk, cyberpunk kind of quality to it and make it work.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that was surprising, I think, to a lot of people for Kamigawa, is that they made it work.
Yeah, I mean, the whole year, and this is something that we can look back on, and now I think to jump to the end of this podcast to say there's something they definitely hit. We were saying this time last year that all these sets were going to be like, okay, we're going to bring technology into Magic. This is going to be Magic's sort of big mech tech year, right? With all the sets that are coming through, there's an element of that. And now looking back on it, the only naysayers about Kamigawa were, I don't want to have sci-fi cyberpunk in my fantasy game, right? Even though, as we've discussed many times, all of Magic's original Dominaria story was based on the idea of ancient magic technology, but whatever. But this was like hard sci-fi, and we've said it when we spoke about Kamigawa before. But looking back on it, has it ruined the aesthetic of the game, even like a little bit?
No,
not for me, not for you. I don't think for many people. Like, it's rad. It's so cool because they did it well. They still have your like shamans, and you have your magic users, and you have all your like races of creature type that, you know, can still be magic-y, but now they're riding a cool fucking hoverbike.
Yeah, now it's biker mice from Mars.
Yeah, who doesn't want biker mice from Mars?
Exactly.
I've said it before, I'll say it again. I want to build a Grease Fang deck. I don't know what's holding me back, but fear. Yeah.
I feel like 1,000 years ish, give or take, which is kind of what they had to jump up to keep it to story relevance. I think it's a realistic twist. I mean, I say twist. I think it's a realistic development for a plane to have that kind of technological advancement. Like if you look at, say, imagine if we'd done Kaladesh 1,000 years in the past.
Well, this is it. What's the next set that's going to get a past?
Yeah, exactly. Do we see a throwback to, like, say, the Blood Age in Strixhaven or something like that?
I want it so much.
So I think that reversion is really, really cool. I think doing a jump ahead is probably risque. And it's funny because I only just found out a couple of days ago that Bruderclad was apparently sent. Is it from Dominaria?
Yeah.
And was sent back from a potential future of Dominaria.
Yeah.
Which could have been, the Dominaria where the Phyrexians have taken over.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I didn't realise this. For some reason, I thought it was actually just.
Yeah, that was
it was from Mirrodin.
Like a little pseudo. Future site.
Exactly, precisely, yeah. Because and I was like, oh, okay, so that's interesting. So I don't know if it's something they'll properly look into in the future. And this was the only set they could really do it with, because it was the only set that originally was set in the past. So I don't know if there's any other sets they can do that with. And considering we've already had, and we'll get to it soon, like New Capenna, and if we do ever get to, like, say, a cowboy world, then maybe we'll have some more futuristic kind of qualities or modern day technology effects in. Also, we can still go back to places like, Ravnica or even Kaladesh, which has that kind of steampunk kind of feel. Like, I don't think that there's many other planes that will have that jump, but it's nice to know that Kamigawa is still available to go back to. And I feel like they'll be way more comfortable to do that again. I mean, Cyberpunk, was it 2029 or whatever, what is it that came out recently?
2020.
The Netflix show.
The anime.
Yeah.
Yeah, Edge Runners.
Edge Runners, that was it, exactly. And that's hugely popular. And I guess maybe...
It was really good.
It was really good anime.
Good. And it was going to be standalone. They're not doing a sequel.
Mm-hmm. And it has almost the exact same feel of art style as well that some of the Kamigawa cards had. And I think from a story relevance point of view, it didn't feel out of sync with everything else that happened this year. Like, I think it's something, again, that we should talk about at the end, is like, how did all of the sets and the story as a grand arc, even though they're not doing grand arcs anymore, how did it all the story beats kind of fit in together? A Ninja Planeswalker. We got a Ninja Planeswalker.
Yeah, love it.
Delivery of the Wanderer actually being the Emperor. That was great.
I didn't mind that at all.
That was fantastic. We actually got to see, like, the interactions of, like, Kami like Kyodai. We got to see what Jin was up to. I think as a set, I don't know how it couldn't have delivered more. I think its showcases were phenomenal. We've got anime back. We've got anime in the game, and it's probably not going anywhere.
Yep.
Even most recently with Jumpstart, we've had a few different anime artworks and stuff. So I feel like... for something that could have been super, super polarizing, I feel like they ticked enough boxes on both sides of the argument that neither group were unhappy. The group that wanted to see old school Kamigawa, because they still got some of that, and then those that wanted to see a reinvention. And for those that even just love Cyberpunk, I feel like it ticked all of the boxes super, super well. I don't know anyone that really had any grumbles about it.
It also shows that they've figured out how to introduce these high concept sets like a lot better, with the lead-in of the Vorthos stuff. I think 2023 was a massive year for, like, stoking the fires that 2021 created, of people liking Vorthos stuff without necessarily calling themselves Vorthos, without even necessarily caring too much about it. Obviously, the whole reason anyone plays this game, I think this is something we said in our very first episode, this is what we touched on, is that if people didn't care about what people consider Vorthos stuff, like the art and the lore and the fantasy setting and all this kind of stuff, they wouldn't be playing this game at all. They'd just be writing numbers on a bit of cardboard. They'd be playing like poker or some shit, do you know what I mean?
Even the spikes, I don't feel like, nowadays, with organised play being slightly less of a focus, I feel like that the spike demographic is slightly diminished. And I feel like the longer you play the game for, the more you're going to find that plane that sings to your soul. Yeah. And the more styles that Magic tries to incorporate, the more likely you are to get that one plane. Like, this year, for example, we've had I've seen people that are very poo-poo about most things, and then the Transformers cards came out, and they're like, "Oh my god! Like, this is exactly what I've always wanted. This is my favorite thing ever." And then suddenly they collect all of the Transformers cards, even though almost everyone else in the game is going, "Why are there Transformers?
Why are there Transformers?
Why are there Transformers in our game?"
But it just showed that they can roll this thing out, because they did the online manga, they did the several different styles of trailer. Yes. They released the story before the cards came out, which is now like a really good. Like that, because we forget that's not how they've always done things. They'll go, here's the set, and then we're going to do the story over the next 3 or 4 weeks. And you're like, well, I know so and so dies.
The story spotlight card got leaked. Now you know Ugin, or what's his Niv Mizzet
dies,
gets reborn, and we didn't even know he was dead yet.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
like great, fantastic.
Stuff like that. So it shows that they can do it, and that there are people in the company who really do care. And they can't do it for every set. God, could you imagine the amount of money and prep that went in for a bunch of that stuff?
Yeah,
But, they brought in, like, those extra cultural consultants to address a lot of the issues they've had in past sets, and, like, most of Magic, to be honest, and indeed Wizards of the Coast at large, I think, are trying to really tighten that up, because there was a whole thing with Spelljammer, their D&D in space module, where they had a couple of issues with some of the classes and races. Even using the term race is something that they're looking at as well, and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah. It's definitely cool. Anyway, we already did a Kamigawa podcast. Let's talk about Capenna.
Yeah. So from one well delivered, it's good that you kind of like sat on the back of that saying the trailer and everything. Now, New Capenna also had a fantastic intro and delivery in terms of its trailer. I think its trailer was good. It wasn't as good as the Kamigawa one. I mean, obviously that's a point of opinion, but I feel like it didn't have the same. I don't want to say delivery, but there was an album that came out with with New Capenna. And the album, as far as I can tell, is probably one of the best received out of the ones that have all been done so far.
They did music for
Kamigawa and
Kaldheim. What was the trailer for Capenna? Oh my gosh, remind me.
It's the one where they're talking. It's the Art Deco effects of all of the different demon heads of the houses.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's a bit more vague than the Kamigawa one, because that was very much closely following Kaito and the Wanderer. So it was a little bit more generic, but it was the one that had all the coins at the end that kind of fell down. Do it for your family, or it's all about the family. It made it feel very much like a mafia boss kind of intro, which I thought was really, really cool. And then we've also now for the first time properly touched on a time of life that people playing this game could potentially have been at least aware of, even if they didn't live in it themselves.
Yeah, the kind of hangover from the 20s and 30s are definitely felt by some of the older generations. Sure.
Exactly. If you're like, 60 plus playing this game, there's definitely going to be a feeling of like, oh my god, I remember this, either the style of the music, even maybe the style of certain cars, especially like building architecture. It's also the first time we've really closely followed like a specific modern culture, being, America. And you've already done a nice in-depth kind of episodes, like looking at New Capenna and its and how it reflects on that specific time of culture.
Yeah, the kind of like immigration story of America. Yeah, it was Michelle Rapp came on board for that, who's obviously massively sort of authoritative, I think, on having that voice in MTG. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was a real bold swing. It was a real bold swing for those kinds of themes and for the themes of technology. I mean, but again, it hasn't ruined anything. No. Having Runaway Limousine or whatever the fuck it was called. I can't remember. It was one of Sheldon Memory's flavor picks. The limousine card. Like, that, I don't care. I don't mind seeing that on a Magic card.
Like, if you can see a mech, I mean, again, we didn't really talk about this necessarily, but like, if you can have Evangelion like body mechs in Kamigawa, how can you not be okay with a car? Yeah,
or a train.
Just because the car makes it look like, oh, but I can relate to that more. It's like, sure, but like, I don't understand how like a body mech is less egregious than regular technology, considering some of the things we've seen in Magic already.
Yeah.
And I think we didn't mention it necessarily coming out of Kamigawa, but the attention they've paid towards like not being culturally insensitive is a really important swing, especially the more they try and focus on things that people can have direct relation to. Like, it's easy to be messy with Dominaria because it's not a real place and it can have various different inspirations of culture without feeling like you're actually doing an homage or a pastiche of it to the point of where you have to really hold true to the fundamentals.
I mean, Dominaria is basically Earth. It's like fantasy Earth.
Yeah,
they have
be
different
free.
continents. Yeah,
I mean, I guess you have to be careful. Like, if you're talking about like the Falaji, are you specifically talking about Arab culture, or are you trying to have an homage to it that you can be like flexible around? Where are you taking dress sense from? That kind of thing. Finger gun magic is in the game now, man. And again, I don't hate it, and I don't know many people that did. Like, it didn't feel like...
it didn't feel too silly, did it? It didn't feel too silly.
After Scroll Minigun in Strixhaven...
Well, do you know what I was thinking? I mean, this is like maybe slightly juvenile, but could you imagine a bunch of like Strixhaven teenagers finger gunning each other?
You mean to say finger banging them?
That's exactly what I'm thinking.
Oh,
hey,
dear.
man.
Pew, pew,
hey,
pew.
I was 16 once. That's
Oh, man.
I'm saying.
I just like the idea that there's just these people that pew each other from around the corner.
Well, isn't they have those keen duelists?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, again, Streets of Ukraine, I feel like, again, the Art Deco style they did, especially with the showcases, the lands especially, were phenomenal. I feel like this is the year, I don't know, probably looking back at 2022 as well, no, 2021, sorry. The lands also game was really, really, really high, but looking at the lands game for this year, they've kind of gone a bit cray-cray, because I think the Kamigawa lands might be my favourite ever. Like
the full art?
Yeah. And then, but I know people that absolutely adore the New Capenna ones, especially like for me that mountain, that symmetrical mountain effect, I think is stunning.
Yeah.
I really like the border effect and the showcasing for New Capenna.
Yeah, the Art Deco really sold itself really well.
I think story wise, I think it was really good as well. I think again we got to see Elspeth back. They did a good job of not mangling her character as well, which they very easily could have, because we've not seen her for a while. We've not heard her voice for a while. You can feel a bit out of touch. And I know that she's like a fan favourite to a lot of people, but there hasn't been a lot of relevance since, she got douched over by Heliod and then had to come back through Mintheros. So it's nice to see her back and in the thick of it. It's nice to see the different disparate parts of the multiverse and the characters that we love all kind of slowly amalgamating together. I wouldn't have thought in a random Art Deco American style set we were going to see Tezzeret, Vivian, Elspeth, and Urabrask.
Well, do you know, it's a little bit like with Ravnica when you start seeing, because Ravnica is sort of a keystone for a lot of different planeswalkers, whether they're from there or not. And it's always interesting to see sort of like the Ravnican versions of some of those characters coming in. Like Jace is not from Ravnica, but he considers Ravnica his home, so he has a kind of different swagger when he's there. Or like another example might be Gideon when he was on Amonkhet.
Yeah.
Was kind of like Amonkhet Gideon, where he had like slightly different clothes, but they were like still similar to his Theros gear, but they were, like sort of slightly more.
He felt very at home.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So it is really interesting to see their dress sense change up like drastically.
Oh god, yeah.
Drastically.
The flapper dress.
Oh
effect.
gosh, yeah. The Elspeth's flapper dress, and then Vivian's like detective gear, which is really cool. So the thing I had with the Capenna story is that if Kamigawa had like a really nice big long lead up and build up, and we had like a really clear story of what the hell was going on in both the main and the side stories, I think Capenna and a few of the sets this year did suffer slightly from having the main stories, to me, seemed like the more boots on the ground, like just day in the life of a planeswalker navigating the plane. So we had Elspeth and Giada, and their storyline with all the different heads of state and the Halo. Do you remember when everyone lost their shit over Halo being either potential drugs / alcohol?
Everyone's like, "Oh, you can't promote drugs and stuff," and it's like
No
Spice in Star Wars. Exactly, get over it.
That was like that immediately as soon as the set came out, people just went, "Oh yeah, it's a card game." That was a real like disappointment. Anyway, so and then the side stories had like real story relevant stuff like Vivian and Urabrask, and this happened again in Dominaria United, as we'll see. And I don't know how I feel about it, and I also didn't love the way they handled the Angels, like the idea that the Angels did come back. That was the point at the end of the story. That wasn't clear in the story, but then you had Angel cards in the set. I don't know, there was a little bit of a disparance there of what was going on, I felt.
It felt like a Courier where, is Luca the Luca on the cards, or is Luca the Luca in the story?
Yeah.
Because the story spotlight cards and everything that happened made him come across as a much more relatable character, and his interactions with his flappy cat dinosaur thing were much more positive than they were given over in the story. So there was this kind of weird dissonance of where you have two different representations of the character depending on what part of the lore you're invested in.
Is Yozalith blue or is it orange?
Exactly. And it kind of felt the same with New Capenna, of where there was this the story they released on the cards. It was almost like an epilogue to the story, because you got 5 episodes of the Angels being gone, and then you get to the set and there's a bunch of Angels, and everyone's like, well, where did the Angels come from? And they always had to go, so once Giada, sacrificed herself-ish, and maybe she still exists in an avatar form or whatever, all of the Angels came back. It's like, but then why wouldn't you write that in any part of what happened with New Capenna is it felt like it was 4.5 stories, and then they just missed the second half of episode 5, and they just didn't give, we didn't get any real culmination to what was happening with Urabrask. We didn't get any culmination to what was going to be happening with any of the characters moving forward. And the Angels basically never showed up again. So almost like they had the delivery leading up to the climax was pretty good. You know, I liked the way they handled Xander. Xander's now was a fan favourite through the story, you know, taken too soon. Even Obnixilis, as much as he was very much mustache twirling here, flashing a pan.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, no, again, some characters need to be like this. Not everyone needs to have some grand overarching scheme, or some other planeswalkers like Ashok. You only want to see little tidbits of to have this feeling of they've got these bigger plans going on in the background. But I like that Obnixilis was just the stand-in typical bad guy, you know, and he gets a little bit douche and he goes, "Rah, drats, Elspeth, I'll see you next time," and you know, and then bounces out again, which I think worked, especially when we've got this underlying why is there a breast there? That why is there this tiny little bubble? And because that's the thing, right? The city's a bubble, and we haven't even seen the rest of the plane. It's very similar to Kaladesh, where we only really saw one city. We didn't see the outlying continents. Also similar to, say, Ixalan, we've only seen half of the world. Same with Strixhaven, we've only seen one tiny part of Arcavios. Like, I'm interested to see what more they will do with New Capenna, because this felt like a very focused set based on Elspeth.
Yeah.
This was an Elspeth set. And maybe we'll go back and we'll see what happens beyond that. And maybe that's why it kind of slipped from my memory a little bit, because it felt more like it was a necessary stepping stone for the year's worth of story progression. But maybe the actual set itself didn't have as much gravity, and the plane as a whole didn't get enough of a representation. And I think the problem with that is the more you dig into New Capenna, the more interesting it gets. And it's a shame that a few of those notes weren't more propped up, you know, when the set was actually released. And again, when you're shifting through 4 different planes every year, it's kind of easy to go, cool, that's now done, on to the next one.
Yeah, I don't know if I felt it more this year or less than last year with the one set thing. I suppose last year we did get Crimson Vow and Midnight Hunt, so that did feel like a 2-set block, even though it wasn't really. I mean, I suppose it was. I don't know what they were. There was a double release.
It was definitely an Act 1, Act 2, but it kind of felt like one play.
Yeah.
So you got to spend half a year sitting in Innistrad, kind of readjusting to it, and it meant that you had time that in the first set, if you didn't see this character that you really wanted to see, you're like, oh, well, we're definitely going to at least see him in the next set.
Yeah.
Whereas if you don't see certain people, I mean, maybe not for something like New Capenna, because it's a new plane and we don't know, you know, we're new to the flavor texts and things like that. This random, you know, character that might pop up, we don't have the urge to see yet. But for something like Kamigawa, if you didn't see a character that you expected to see, who knows when we're going to be next to Kamigawa and see it again. So you only got that one chance. So I feel like with Innistrad, it got to tick off a lot of the boxes, and we got to actually sit in it long enough for people to be satisfied and go, cool, that's enough Innistrad, we can move on. Whereas I feel like New Capenna was the one set that was like, maybe we needed a bit more time. And maybe with this new format where they do these epilogue sets, you know, how they're going to have not Much in the Machines, what's the Aftermath set coming out after?
Oh gosh, so we got what?
Is it all we won Aftermath?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're doing that little set. I think that's the kind of thing that would work quite nicely with a few sets, especially or a few different planes. If we're not going to go back for a while, which we know obviously we're not going to do for probably at least 2 years going back to New Capenna, because I don't know what the story relevance would be if the Phyrexian arc gets completed. Then again, it's like, okay, well, I liked that, but I guess I'm going to wait for next time to see if I really liked it, or if it was just, you know, a moment.
Yeah, I mean, we're going back to, is it Ikoria?
But we're going back to Ikoria and Eldraine next year.
So both Ikoria and Eldraine, and both of the sets there, I mean, especially Eldraine, didn't have huge things going on in the way of story relevance. So but they were obviously set up to be like, right, we want to kind of softball this plane in so that when we go back and we might have something more going on, or use it as a palette cleanser. And I think Capenna is going to be one of those planes where it's not Ravnica. There's not going to have these huge story relevant things happening on, but it's going to be one of the planes they can kind of jam around with when they're not doing massive story arcs.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like somewhere like it's interesting as well, because I feel like somewhere like Eldraine actually got a really, really good breadth shown of it, where you got to see all of the 5 kingdoms and you got a little bit of the wilds, which is probably why then they go, oh, okay, let's go back and really explore the wilds.
Yeah. Oh, is it Ixalan we're going back to as well next year?
Exactly. Yeah, we're not going to Ikoria. Yeah, we're going to Ixalan. The lost cave or caverns of Ixalan, which again is interesting because we got to see the battle for the Immortal Sun, but we didn't get to see maybe we didn't get to dig down in deep into all of these random tombs
Yeah,
and places.
Arazka was like one
exactly,
city, right?
but we could have easily seen much more. You know, and there'll probably be less sea stuff. I mean, who knows? Who knows? That's for next year to talk about.
Okay, I guess next up is Dominaria United.
It is, yeah. Which actually I think did exactly opposite to what we. I mean, all of our predictions, and we've been predicting the Phyrexians being coming back for years and years and years. I think it's interesting when we looked at this year. When they did their what's it called, the showcase of where they go, these are all the sets for the next year.
Yeah, sure.
I think when we looked at that, we went, well, guess that's another year of not going back to Phyrexia. And even though we did, I think we were right to speculate a little bit that we're probably going to be building up towards them fighting the Phyrexians in Dominaria United and Brothers War, because why would they go back to a time of warring with the Phyrexians if it's not for eventually building up the Phyrexians? Yeah. Each set has had relevant story progression for the Phyrexians. So I don't think we were wrong so much in this was the year of Phyrexia, because in retrospect, I think it was the year of Phyrexia. It was just the year of Phyrexia coming. Yeah. Whereas next year, or at least the latter half of, or the beginning half of this year, it's going to be Phyrexia is here and how are we going to deal with it and what's the culmination? Are they going to win? Are we going to be able to defeat them? What's the lasting ramifications, which apparently are going to be significant?
Yeah, a lot of people are speculating no more Planeswalkers.
Exactly. Well, a lot of people are speculating that the Realm Breaker is going to join everything as this kind of multiversal highway, and you no longer have to have a spark to be able to transport between. And then how is the clashing of that going to work? It's basically Shards of Alara. It's Conflux on a multiversal scale, which I think is actually super interesting. But yeah, Dominaria United, Zalfir hasn't come back yet. They didn't really rally. I mean, actually, I say that. I think this I think was the biggest problem with Dominaria United was it's similar to New Capenna for a set that probably needed to have about a 10-episode arc of stories.
Yeah.
Which it did if you think about the 5 main stories and then the 5 side stories. It needed a 10-story, like a main story kind of arc to really kind of fill this impending progression of Sheoldreds and her sleeper agents, because that for me is pinnacle, peak Phyrexian invasion, feeling unnerved, not knowing who to trust, who's got your back. And as much as the notes I think were ticked comfortably in the moment, I feel like they weren't sat on for long enough.
The theories and the lead up to Dominaria United, even just with the name and a couple of bits of artwork, like you had that big Thran
Gateway thing.
Yeah. Everyone was going, right, so this is going to be the Phyrexians are going to be coming back. They're going to invade Dominaria. We're going to find out they've already invaded Dominaria, which kind of sort of came true. We have, like, you know, all the whole plane's going to, like, mesh together. We're going to have Dominaria united with other planes and blah, blah, blah. All these different kind of, like, side theories. And it all seemed really grand. And then none of it happened. But the thing's what we got. We did get Phyrexian sleeper agents being revealed. We did get, you know, planeswalkers being killed. We had planeswalkers being revealed as sleepers themselves. We had Sheoldred coming back. We had what else happened in that bloody set?
Well, we have a million returning characters, including Urtai was back as well.
Yeah.
Like
Khan gets captured.
But that's the thing, is it happened in the very first episode. I think one of the first revealed cards we saw for the set was Phyrexian Sleeper Agent. And at that point, not really much of a sleeper agent if it's one of the first cards that you get to see from the set. So maybe at that point, it was interesting that the first episode was Khan discovers Sheoldred and discovers they've already been there for a while. But I don't feel that gravity of, like, if they've been here for a while, how long have they been here for? And then we do, like, a jump of, like, 2.5 months or something of when he gets uncovered. And obviously, we as the audience, we know, fuck, the Phyrexians are here and they've been here a while and who knows what they're into. But we didn't really get that build up for ourselves. We just got told this and then have to experience it kind of separate to the characters within the story. And if you're not following the same dread and fear and the same reveals that your characters are feeling, then it kind of has a bit of a dissonance, because at that point you don't feel involved in the story. You just feel like you're kind of watching the pieces move whilst you already know the grand scheme in the background. Which maybe created a little bit of separation. I do think on an individual basis the stories were phenomenal. We've talked about
the Weatherlight also got completed as well. I think we
kind of off-screenish.
Yeah, well, unless you read a side story, but even then it was
in between, and even then it was between the side stories.
The Braids storyline, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, at the end of it, and then you get again. It just felt like it wasn't quite weaved together in a way that was one coherent story.
I think, and this goes back to my looking at the year as a whole. His Brothers War is also included in this year, so I think I can top and tail it with Kamigawa, because we won't count double feature. Kamigawa and Brothers War. 2 sets that I think, this is me speculating, the WotC team really cared about and really wanted to make C work. I don't think anyone gave a shit about Dominaria United outside of individual story beats, because you look at even the lead up to it, there was very little lead up. The trailers were very nothingy and came out kind of after the set.
Yeah,
came out.
Dominaria United trailers came out for Brothers War, even though it wasn't relevant to Brothers War. It was relevant to Dominaria United.
And then you even look at like the key art, for example. The key art on the bundle is sometimes that kind of stuff for me is a dead giveaway. The key art for the bundle was Ajani on one side, because Ajani was one of the big characters. Who was on the other side of the box? Liliana Vess.
Why?
In her old Liliana Vess
I have no idea why she was on this plane.
Because I think I tweeted out about it. Even her pose was like, oh, that's what's the chops? Who died? Jaya. Sorry, Grandma. Completely forgot you already. Jaya died. And even like her pose on the key art box looked like Jaya doing fire magic. Because Liliana doesn't do like big, swoopy light magic, does she? So why is that? I mean, it's just...
It was very misleading. Yeah. And if we compare it to the way that we led into Streets of New Capenna and the way we led into Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, both of those sets had a really well catered for and really well crafted trailer season and build up, and Dominaria United just as much if of all the sets that needed this slow menacing build up, Dominaria United was the set. And out of all of the three of them, it's the one that suffered the most for not seeming to have one. Which is really, really, really sad, because even if you look all the way back to New Phyrexia, which at the time was New Phyrexia / Mirrodin Pure, we didn't know. That trailer where you have the Phyrexian language coming over the top was one of, still considered to be one of the best trailers that that happened before we had this nice resurgence after War of the Sparks trailer, and we've got a lot of very good trailers since. But it just didn't have that menacing quality. Again, I feel like episode 1 was stunning and phenomenal, but should have been about episode 3 or 4 in the arc. And that was probably the only bit of like, oh god. And the rest of it is just, well, the Phyrexians are here, when are they going to find them? I bet you're a Phyrexian, and like even a lot of people had an issue with Sten, wasn't it? Like in his artwork, they showed his artwork very early on, and it was very clear in his artwork that you could see he was a Phyrexian.
I still made saying I didn't spot that.
But,
he was one of my favourite characters.
Even if you didn't necessarily, the problem is all it takes is one person on the internet to see it and then put it up into a Reddit post, and then suddenly everyone's aware of it.
True.
And then it undermines, because it was in the very next episode that we find out about it, and it's kind of like, oh, what a shock. I mean, but again, I like that you say that you didn't realise, and again, you didn't do any leakage, like I always
stay
do.
off of Reddit, tend to. Yeah.
So this is the perspective we usually get, is that I tend to go in balls deep, because I don't give a it's not that I don't give a shit, it's just I want to have the most amount of information possible. And it gives me a bit more perspective to be able to speculate on the larger arcs if we have the small bits of information, whereas I like that you kind of want to be blindsided and kind of see how it naturally hits in the way that they want it to, without it being spoiled. And I feel like it was nice to see that Ajani was a surprise for you, Stem was a surprise for you, so I think on a micro level where you're not, an obsessive stan like I am, of where I'm digging for every nugget of information possible, it did probably still deliver in the right fashion.
I don't know. It was boring. I don't know why. I can't put my finger on it. It was just really boring compared to the other sets in the year.
Do you reckon it was just because it was Dominaria again, but didn't quite... I guess for me it
didn't
felt
really push anything, no.
And I would like to have the perspective of someone who was playing back in the original Invasion days, to see, did it have the same gravity that the old school Phyrexian Invasion had? And I think the answer is going to be a very resounding no, mostly because it didn't have a giant novel next to it that kind of really showed you all of the machinations and the inner twistings and workings and all of the duplicity and all the various, almost like to a point of 100 different working characters that are all working with this grand story. Like, you can't do that in a 5 vignette kind of, even if it's not vignettes, like realistically the amount of words that you're doing is akin to maybe 2-3 chapters of a regular book. Like, you can't quite give that depth and still deliver the pop at the same time. Again, you're ticking a lot of boxes, just chucking Baird back in there for some reason. I don't feel like it was spread. I think it was spread too thin. I think it was spread too thin when it really should have been a little bit more focused, and it should have been more slowly delivered instead of it all just being dropped at once. Again, we've said this before, there has been a very poor execution of how the Dominarian invasion is going, to the point of where I don't even really care. Apparently we're still fighting in Dominaria because the Phyrexians there. I'm like, yeah, no, they're there. We had this big, apparently giant fight on the Mana Rig that came out of nowhere. You know, like, it just doesn't, I don't feel like it was very accurately
Some of the
portrayed.
best stories in Brothers War, in terms of the modern ones, the Teferi ones, were the ones where they went to, like, different places, like where you saw Saheeli on Kaladesh and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know why Dominaria missed as such, but it didn't feel like it out of all of the Phyrexian reveals, I feel like it was also slightly less intriguing than what's Jin doing, because he's converting spirits and everything, and then, oh god, Tamio's been completed.
Yeah.
You know, that was a big shock. And then, why is Urabrask here? And then, Tezzeret's turncoating again. I mean, that's not a surprise. Tezzeret turncoats all the time.
That's really indicative, I think, of then, even in terms of set reception and set playability, that kind of massive surprise, oh my god, it was more amazing than we thought, and oh, that was a huge disappointment. None of the sets this year have done what people thought they would do. Because if you think about, storyline wise, it was a huge surprise that Planeswalkers can now be completed, and it was a massive letdown when Shieldred just sort of turns up and does very little.
Oh, okay, there was that beginning bit, we've got such plans for you, she whispers into Khan's mind, and you're like, cool, I guess we'll find out about that next year.
Yeah, in Brothers War, we absolutely got some of that. And I will say, good development for Teferi, and good development for Khan, sort of character-wise. Again, Teferi just makes, since Dominaria 2018, any story with Teferi in it is just way better because of it.
It's really way nice. Better. It's nice having these old characters that have the understanding of the old lore, but are also relevant to the new lore. It's much harder to be a two-dimensional character when you've already got three-dimensional you've already been fleshed out. So it's kind of hard to take that back again, where it's difficult to instill like, more relevance to someone like Tyvar, who's just shirtless elf dude, you know. So again, Teferi is a great example of how to do a long-standing character really well, and then build the story around them. But again, in terms of, we haven't really talked about power or power level or cards or anything, like, in terms of like what we like enjoy playing with, because I don't think that's necessarily relevant to like what we want to do as a podcast.
No, I think maybe later on, like, remind me, we'll talk about like what decks we've built this year.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of my last sections. But I think, again, for something that should have been much more easily digested to, I think something that we probably were a little low on in terms of what we kind of cared about in terms of the Brothers War, and going back and seeing a set from the past. And my biggest worry was, is there going to be wibbly wobbly timey wimey stuff? Are they going to fudge it up? Are they going to do it justice? Is it even necessary? Like, why are we going back and seeing the Brothers War again?
Yeah.
Yes to all of those things. Oh my god, they nailed it.
They did do wibbly wobbly timey stuff, and it was fine.
It was absolutely fine.
In fact, it was great.
We got Urza and Teferi talking on the brink of the Silex explosion at the end of the story combination, which might be one of my favourite moments of this year in terms of story. We got him bouncing to moments of history, and then seeing that low to the ground aspect of the tragedy and the desperate quality of war that we just didn't feel in Dominaria United. And it's funny because the fights and everything are completely irrelevant, because the Ice Age comes a few hundred years after all of the stories that we see in because it was the side, I forget now, was it the side stories that were back in time?
No,
the main stories were, and then the side stories were the ones that were actually like, oh, let's protect Urza's tower.
We're in the tower,
exactly. Which is really cool, because it was showing that the important thing for the set wasn't what was happening in the current day and age, which might be also why they yada yada Dominaria United. It was more, oh, let's look at the moments back in time. Let's re-show you one of the best times of Magic lore, and not fudge it up. And they succeeded very well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny having a character do time travel stuff, because I think the temptation is to have him kind of go back in time and bump into Caleb and Krug, or, accidentally knock off a bunch of papers that reveals the invention that, one of the characters can make that saves the war, and it wouldn't have happened unless Teferi went back in time, and blah-de-blah-de-blah. Whereas they didn't do any of that. They had, with these low-to-the-ground war stories, Teferi popping up, scaring the shit out of some soldier when he's 20 years old, and then him relating that story to his soldier buddies like 50 years later, like in the next side story. And do you know what I mean? It had like low consequences, which meant that you could have your cake and eat it too, and not have the focus be Teferi, but just remembering that the reason we're seeing all this shit is because it's kind of pseudo through Teferi's eyes. Like, not fully, but like to a point where it's like he's our anchor, right? Like, to use the term that they've been using in the story. He is our anchor there. So it's nice to have him pop up and do something, and also to have it kind of, for what I'm sure will be relevant in March for the Machines / Aftermath, have it being that he is somewhat affecting the past, or the temporal anchor that we see Sahili create for him does maybe work a little too well. And
maybe there'll be some grand re-entry. Because that's the thing we haven't said, but we finish with Teferi with him being left in an undisclosed location on a random beach, having been physically, so normally it was spiritually transported.
Yeah.
Quick side note, it was nice that the temporal anchor isn't just one person going, oh, I've got this amazing ability. It took Sahili, Ankaya, and Teferi's abilities all to be able to make this thing function. You know, the MacGuffin wasn't just some easy... Because I find the Silex is a little bit MacGuffin-y because we don't know where it came from. It's cute that we have to fill it with memories of the land. I think that's a nice line because it feels really almost like eldritch and ethereal in nature, and we still have no idea where it came from. Whereas something like the anchor could have very easily yada been like, oh yeah, Sahili's really good at artifice. Yeah. It's like, no, it took a lot of effort.
And she's tweaking Tornos and Urza's designs even like as a baseline.
Exactly.
Like, she didn't just make it. Like,
And it felt like it was a natural culmination of all of these different characters that we've met over the last 5 years of Magic that needed this. And again, by the end of it, he didn't actually end up doing much of anything.
No.
I think he only gained a little bit of knowledge. And the only knowledge he gained was there isn't a way to activate it necessarily. It's magical. And it was also quite nice to find and be around for the moment where Urza first realises that magic is a thing.
Yeah.
Which is kind of bizarre now we think about it, but magic, anything before that was happening in Dominaria and in the Thran Empire was all just technology and power stones.
Yeah.
They didn't really understand. They didn't have coloured mana. This is why all the power stones, tap for colourless and can't be used to cast non-artifact spells, is because they're not mana. It's not actual, ley line functioning mana, which is a really cool side point. And again, it kind of gave a metaphysical justification to a lot of things that we haven't really had to look at recently. We kind of just go, yeah, here's another set, and then this is how it makes it work, and it kind of came back down to like the flavour of how magic works, and how the world works. And also, we got Gix. Man.
We did get Gix.
We got Gix.
Gix
got. And then, again, we didn't focus so much on it that it was super relevant, but I think it was also nice to see how old school Phyrexia works in turning different sides against each other. Again, I think the Brothers War was a really, really phenomenal throwback set, and it shows that they can do that. Now, whereas with Kamigawa, there aren't many sets that we need to do here it is 1,000 years later, let's catch it up to the modern Magic environment. There are plenty of sets you can do a throwback to, not necessarily needing it to be Teferi's going back in time. Because I don't think there are very many cards, if any, that show him back in the old school days. We get obviously the Temporal Anchor, we get him separated from his timeline as a spell, but I don't think we see many cards of him being back in Dominaria. We just see Dominaria then, we just see it during the Brothers War in a bubble, as it were. And it's also really interesting to see artifact cards that have prototype that do feel like old school artifacts.
Well, yeah, this is it. I think this set, to kind of tie it back into the year as a whole, it tops and tails with two sets, Kamigawa and Brothers War, that are essentially, you could cynically say, pandering to older Magic players, as in people have been playing since a lot before, going well, Magic's taken a really weird turn, and kind of trying to sweeten the pot with all the techie stuff coming back. With hey, look, here's the old border stuff, and here's cards that feel like they're old school. And hey, remember Kamigawa? You loved Kamigawa. Well, this is Kamigawa, but they're doing it in a way which does feel progressive and new.
Exactly.
So they really are. They are pandering, but they're giving people what they want in a creative and sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Integrity. When you have integrity, do you know what I mean? They're doing it with an actual purpose, as opposed to just
it's not
going
for the sake of it.
You're oh, here's a new foiling, you apes, enjoy. Do you know what I mean?
They're not just throwing things at us and forcing us to enjoy it. They're genuinely almost going, what do the players want? I also think it's probably easier for a bunch of the designers to do a set like Brothers War because they were probably playing during the time of antiquities and that kind of thing, so they probably have their own perspective. It's a lot harder to make a new plane with new characters, new places. You don't know at that point what the people are going to respond to. So I mean, that's maybe why out of the four sets, Capenna was a little, again, kind of washes over me a little, is because I have less nostalgia for a plane that is new compared to Kamigawa, which was one of my favourites, and Dominaria, which has been around forever, and then Brothers War, which is sets that I've specifically already seen and played with. So maybe that's as a victim of its own circumstance. I also think it's really cool that the showcases weren't a new treatment on any of the cards within the set. It was just a bunch of artifact reprints, and I originally put it's a bit of a cop-out, but I was like, but also in retrospect, it's something old, something new. I'm sorry, something old in a new frame that we've got that's already existing as a reskin, which is almost exactly what the set is anyway. We've already had these things before, but we're seeing them in an old light rather than giving them a new twist. We're going back and twisting them in an old way, which is kind of interesting. And then also there was Transformers in the set.
There were also just
Which, again, I feel like it's a bit of a shame that we're now seeing Secret Lairs kind of drift into the sets proper.
It is a bit.
And I feel like that's one of the things that might be... It's my only question mark kind of going into the new year is this going to be something that continues?
I mean, it was interesting, right? Because they had, we've already mentioned it this episode, but they had those Bram Stoker Dracula cards in Crimson Vow, as well as just... They had three different versions of Edgar Markov, right? And two of them were different Draculas, I think. But at least they were relevant to the set that was coming out.
Yeah.
Because Innistrad is a pastiche on Gothic horror, right? Especially when it comes to the vampires. But to have Transformers being like, well, it's mechs, isn't it? Yeah,
and also the style, right? As much as I think the style is great because it does hold true to the old cartoony style, I don't think they look bad, and I've said this before and I stand by it. Mechanically, they're very interesting.
Yeah.
It did just kind of feel like for the first time they didn't trust the set was going to sell enough, so they were like, what else can we put in here to make it sell better? Which is basically what they do is show. They all pretend that the showcases are for the players. No, they're not. The showcases are there to sell your set. You do these things and these weird treatments, and you do these cool lands. Like, I know you did these Kamigawa lands to make me buy way more packs. It didn't work because I bought singles. But I know what you're doing, Wizards. And as long as you're doing it right, I'm not going to complain about it. It was really glaringly obvious with the Transformers thing, where it just felt like they didn't have the face, so they just needed to inject one more thing. Because maybe the newer players don't care about this old war that happened.
Yeah, maybe.
So I don't know. Again, that's a little cynical, and I think from a marketing point of view, it's probably very on the nose. And I don't think I'm wrong about it, but I also don't think it necessarily matters as long as that's not the thing that they keep leaning into. Because I think it's obvious now, looking in retrospect to Brothers War, they did do a very, very good job of the set, regardless of them trying to put extra bits in. And that's why it kind of felt unnecessary, because the set didn't need to have these random Transformers cards in them. You could have just done another super drop, which you're going to do every 3 months anyway. So, I don't know. I mean, in terms of accessibility, I guess it's better. But, speaking of Secret Lairs, I guess we should probably glance by the supplemental sets of the year.
Sure, yeah. I have no references to what any of these were, so you take the lead on this.
So, Double Masters 2022 happened this year. And I've put this actually the reprint set we all needed. There are so many cards, because they did EDH Rec did the best cards reprinted this year. And I think out of the top 10, I think like 6 of them were from Double Masters, being things like, Dockside Extortionist, Smothering Tithe, those kinds of cards. Like, I think it was a really, really good way to inject a bunch of staples to really help, the only format that matters, Commander. I'm joking. But, the idea is... it felt appropriate to spend money on this set. It kind of really, really helped that.
Oh yeah, this is the set where all the swords got a reprint with the the full
and things
art.
like Devoted Druid got done. The one that taps for a color of each permanent type that you have. Bloom Tender, sorry, like loads of cards. Food Chain got reprinted. Concordant Crossroads got reprinted. It was like maybe one of the best reprint sets I think I can remember in recent memory. And for us, it came out just around Command Fest Birmingham. So when you're sat in like a conference room playing loads of Magic, and every time you win a little bit of value or something, you go, "Oh, I'm gonna go and get that fancy pack," and then you happen to open a Force of Negation. For me, it gave me that kind of like yay kind of feeling that I used to have when I opened cards, which I didn't really have as much recently because I don't tend to buy packs as much. But it was the first time in a long time that I've kind of felt like...
Oh no, the swords were in the first Double Masters, apologise. This is the one which had the Eldrazi's reprinted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, if you look through the set, as much as you might be like, well, these cards are still really expensive, they were more expensive before. And at least now you've got an option to get different printing.
I have a Kozilek Butcher of Truth, a Ulamog's Ceaseless Infinite Gaia, which both of them from the last Double Masters, and then I play Emrakul, The Promised End, and I generally play them. If I play one in a deck, I'll always play three.
Yeah,
and they've been in a couple of decks now. It was actually my Belv deck that I took apart, and they were each like 40 quid each, even for like the Double Masters versions of them. So when I saw them being reprinted in this one with fancy art, I was like, I'm not a big MTG Finance guy, but my cards that are maybe approaching the 50 quid mark, I do kind of like the idea that they're that expensive. Just from I managed to get this because I pulled the foil Ulamog. And no, their prices haven't been touched. It's amazing, really.
It just makes them a little bit more accessible. Because again, it's that kind of elite. It's a weird middle ground, I feel like, when it comes to collecting, of where I want my cards that I'm really happy that I open to maintain their value, but at the same time, I want the ones that I don't have to be more accessible. So it's just a matter of not being too FOMO-y about it, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, Double Master sets are always fun, especially for new bits of lore and new takes on things. And, yeah.
Also, double rares, right? Again, got to get that gimmick in there. Commander Legends, Battle for Baldur's Gate.
Wah, wah.
Yeah, that was this year as well. So my only thing I said for this is the only set that I've engaged in a limited environment in this year, and it might be one of the most enjoyable draft experiences
I've ever
experience.
Had. Yeah.
It was phenomenal. As a set, did we need another D&D set? So, and I don't mean in general, because I like the fact that we're touching on these expansive worlds that have all this lore. They don't have to create this lore and kind of make it all fit together. They can just go, let's look at, say, the realm of Castle Ravenloft, and let's just do a whole set around that, because that's going to appeal to a lot of people. It has a really well structured story. It has relevant lore within its own worlds, and you can get behind it. Fine. Did it need to be as soon after the last?
Did it need to be a Commander Legends set?
And did it need to be a Commander Legends set? Again, like, if these two things have been swapped around, I feel like Double Masters feels way more like a Commander set because of its re-injecting reprints in than Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate did, because it's adding in, things like initiative and other,
backgrounds and stuff.
Exactly. Like,
I mean, yeah, it
complicated the format.
If you listen to our Adventure in the Forgotten Realms episode from last year, or even maybe the year previous, we said it then, because they'd already announced that they were going to do Baldur's Gate as the next Commander Legends set. I think in that episode, I went, that's going to be way too much, way too soon. And everyone agrees.
Because you've got things like dice rolling and stuff like that. Again, I don't dislike it because it adds a different twist on a game that you could argue might be getting, I don't want to say the word stagnant, but I mean getting a little bit predictable.
Maybe just needs I have no problem with the D&D stuff being in Magic the Gathering. It's fine. I can't remember what I've said previously, but for now I'm saying it's fine. It's just, it was a total wasted opportunity. If they're doing so many Commander sets nowadays and they're doing them tied to planes that we're already on, and this is something that I know we've said before, the opportunity to do brand new cards with new flavour that excite people about things we haven't quite yet seen or are not like exposed to straight away, like the original Tornos card, or at least the kind of, is Tornos as his apprentice the first one he was ever in? Yeah. The one that doubles activated abilities. Yeah, so that was in the Saheeli Rai Planeswalker Commander deck, because that was the only 5 decks we were going to get that year. Aminatu was also one of the face cards in that in those precons, and we still haven't gone back to her. In fact, she was a reprint, ironically, in this Double Masters thing.
Yeah, it looked like she was going to have some relevance of something or other, and it was like, oh no, just another box art with guess who?
She still
Liliana
could.
Vess.
She still could, with all the timey-wimey for X and shit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Still have no idea where she's from.
But, quite. So I think I don't have a problem with it being D&D. I just think, if you're going to take one of the sets which is exclusively about going, hey, Commander players, and also anyone who likes lore, because Commander is still seen as being like the very Vortho-y format, even though that's kind of debatable at this point. Here's a bunch of face cards and commanders that could have cool relevance, or things you haven't seen, or things you've always wanted to see. But now they're just like, oh, but they're all D&D.
Yeah, so they're all locked. Yeah, they're all locked out from not being the characters that you want to see, and it's less opportunity for them to be printed. Yeah.
So there we go. That's how I feel about that.
Yeah. Again, it's like they shouldn't have to make a whole Brothers War set to give you a Gix card when they could have just put him in any number of the Commander products over any of the number of years we've been asking for him.
Yeah.
I don't think his point being in Brothers War was story relevant anyway, apart from the fact we at least got to have another 5 cards with Gix on the artwork. But whatever. Moving on to something that's probably not particularly controversial, Unfinity.
I mean, we spoke about this.
We've spoken about this at length. I think this might have been that little step into egregious amounts of product in 1 year kind of thing. Of where when you lay it all out together, it's a lot. And Infinity was something I was originally really, really, really excited about. And then the more we saw of it, and the more the half of the set's legal, half of the set isn't legal, the more it kind of muddied and dirtied the general reception of it, I think. I mean, the lands are phenomenal.
Yeah,
but again, you've gimmicked something into your set to make it worth buying for some players. I think a lot of the cards that could have been really interesting for the Commander format aren't legal, which makes them really annoying. And this whole, just rely on Rule 0. At this point, like, you stop using it as an excuse, as a crutch, you know? Like, either make the whole set a Rule 0 a thing, or do the whole set being legal and just flex it into it. You're not telling me you can't make funny cards that work properly, and you can't tell me that things like stickers and attractions are fair game when some of the other cards, which can absolutely work and are grokkable, but the rules don't quite line up. It's an unset, okay?
Also, the stickers ruin some foilings.
Oh, God.
Weird.
Yeah.
I will say, the one thing I will say in favour of this particular unset is I do like the way that they went, we know this is going to be the more sci-fi technological year in our main sets, so the unset is going to be that, but to the nth degree, because it was all silly, like atom punk, cosmic,
gamers, and aliens, and bloopity-blop laser pistols.
Like, it was actual proper sci-fi, or at least sci-fi in that kind of bubblegum Americana kind of way.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really nice way to use unsets. If we ever have a year that, say, the overarching theme is, I don't know, they do, like, proper horror, then to do, like, a really sort of, like, kitschy, like, slasher horror unset would be quite fun. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was intentional or not. I can imagine it was, because they cater their products quite carefully. Even if we don't think they do, they always have a reason. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, I just don't. There are certain aspects that I think that just fell flat. Space Bellerin, like, come on, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
So I guess we're getting kind of. I think that's all of the. I mean, we're not going to talk about each individual commander deck product. I think 40k actually, in retrospect, was actually very well handled.
It was fine.
Yeah, I actually do find a lot of the cards I look at them, I'm like, these are actually fine to take out and put in other things. I got the Necron deck. It plays quite well. I did get the feels of, I remember playing against Tyranids when I was 12. You know, when I see some of the Tyranids cards, I don't think it was bad. I'm interested to see if they can do it with other IPs that don't have such breadth. You know, because I feel like 40k had a lot that they potentially missed out. Whereas, for example, I think we're doing Doctor Who next year, and I don't know how widely spaced it's going to feel and how many cards they can make feel that tie in. Again, I'll judge when it happens.
This is kind of a sinful thing for an English person who's into fantasy and sci-fi to say, but I couldn't give two flying fucks about Doctor Who.
Yeah.
I never have. I've tried, and I've got friends who are like so into it that they get like press tickets for things. Do you know what I mean? Like, we have friends who are like actual, almost card carrying super fans of Doctor Who. That's like recognised by the BBC as being people to email. And I'm sorry, Matt, I couldn't give a fuck about Doctor Who.
Yeah, again, I think that's the problem with IPs, with Universes Beyond, is you're just relying that there's a large enough group of fans within your fan base. Or I guess it's also the idea, and the biggest predominant thing is that they're trying to get people from other forms of entertainment back into our game and trying to convince them, like, hey, look, you might not have tried Magic yet because you don't like general fantasy, so let's at least give you a Doctor Who version of cards so you can feel like, actually this is more accessible for me, or like Lord of the Rings or whatever. And I think it did work with Warhammer 40k.
Yeah.
And I think at the time, if we probably give it the same amount of distance, we probably poo-pooed it in the same fashion that we have now with Doctor Who, and it will probably not be as egregious.
It's always fine. Everything they've done has always been relatively fine. The only thing that wasn't ironically the first thing they did, which was
the Walking Dead.
The Walking Dead. Yeah. Because tonally, even at the time we said it wasn't the fact they're trying it, it's the fact they picked a real world, because it's not, 40k is obviously incredibly violent, but it's a pastiche on the violence. I'm not getting into this now, but like, it is different for anyone that goes 40k is really violent. Yeah, so's Magic.
Yeah,
but like,
you don't get a bloodied baseball bat as an equipment.
Do you know what I mean?
Like, it's just a bit, yeah.
Yeah, so it's all going to be fine. It's all fine.
Yeah. So I guess the last two things we probably want to talk about, I think we should talk about, now that we're going into the year of Phyrexia and it's actually happening, and we've seen at least the next version of every Praetor before we probably see them all again in the next couple of sets. I feel like the lead up from Kaldheim through now to, so we had Kaldheim with Vorinclex taking the Cosmos Elixir, which was a really galling epilogue to a story that was very kind of like pew pew. I might say pew pew, but lots of clash of the realms and all these fights and everything going on, and it's like, okay, cool, that's all fine and dandy.
Essica's bloodied on the floor.
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, oh god, Vorinclex, all right.
Vorinclex drinks the cosmic, or like runs off with it, and you're like, oh shit.
And then when you realise, I think the moment for me was when I realised that the Realm Break was going to be a thing, and I was like, oh, that's what they had the Cosmos Elixir for. Oh my god, okay, that's really cool.
Yeah, the setup from a lot of the threads from Kaldheim. I mean, we've seen art for I think the card's called Resist,
yes,
where Tyvar, this is looking at March of the Machines, is facing off against a Phyrexianized Tybalt, which by the time this podcast comes out, everyone should have seen that artwork by now, at least online. So the seeds planted in Kaldheim, which I think was another set, which I think even we said it a few minutes ago, is like, yeah, well, it was fine, and it kind of had some setup. It's like, oh no, a lot of those things are now coming to bear.
Really relevant.
It's like really cool. That's really good.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest, we've already said this, the biggest thing for Kaldheim was trying to fit 10 realms into a set that was also trying to do some background story work as well.
Oh, I always forget that it didn't land, because in my mind, I'm like, Kaldheim was awesome, and then I remember, well, actually, we didn't think of it so highly because of the amount of realms they had.
Yeah. I think, again, play-wise, I think it worked really well. Anyway, moving through from Vorinclex then to Jin, I think his interaction with Kamigawa and it being like, again, Phyrexians, Kami, does that work? And it's actually really interesting to see, Shiny Pants himself trying to convert spirit matter and trying to use that as a means to be able to complete Planeswalkers, and then to actually succeed, I think was really exciting, because that's a big step for Phyrexian. Again, this sat in the background because the big relevance was really like the Wanderer and Kaito and their kind of story, and getting the Wanderer back and kind of finding out about her, and then kind of all throughout all of this time you've got Tezzeret being a bit of a douche, and there's Ginger Taxius being a bit of a douche, and then before you know it, Tamiya's been scuppered off, and then oh my god, they killed Mum. I think that was really, really clever. Again, we've now seen, we've got this big build up of like, who knows over the next few sets who's going to be completed. Are we going to see more people being completed? Who knows? And we go to then New Capenna, and we have Urabrask again, just kind of sitting in the back, confirming the fact that he's against the real mummy, Elishnon, and I liked that aspect. It wasn't predominant. Again, it was just in the background. We start to see the effects of what happens to the Praetors when they go between planes. Like he was burnt to a crisp, and he had to like rebuild back up again. I think we heard this with Vorinclex, of where he was just a pile of molten bones that had to kind of assimilate wildlife that came past him.
Well, children had to like put themselves back together, or have other people put them back together.
Exactly, had to take the flesh of others to put back. I mean, again, this progression of Phyrexia, I think, is really, really cool, because it's such a grandiose story arc, and it actually has to encompass so many different elements to make it feel like it's the big threat that it is. I think in retrospect it has done that very, very well, because I feel like as much as Shieldred in a bubble and Dominaria United in a bubble didn't have that slow build up as another beat in the long build up from Kaldheim, I think it's probably excusable. And again, they build these sets in the grand scope. They don't build them on a micro scale. So maybe from their point of view, they thought the story was a little bit more, well handled. And it's easier when you only focus on that one set to pull it apart and go, well, actually, the pacing was a bit shit. But then if you put it as a chapter within a book of sets, then I feel like leading up to the end of Dominaria United, Khan being taken away, the Silex being destroyed, Ajani's a sleeper agent, Jaya's been killed. Like that's a lot of things when you think about it. And I feel like in the end it did deliver fine enough. And then again there was Brothers War is a bit of an epilogue, not having to worry about. I mean, we've technically got another Praetor and Gix within Brothers War, but not in a present relevance. So I think as a whole, I think the build up. This has been a year of Phyrexia. It's just been a year of Phyrexia coming. As I said earlier in the episode, rather than being a year of Phyrexia being here. And then when we get to the end of next year, it would have been, I know we've said this before, years of Phyrexian influence.
Yeah.
It just wasn't years of Phyrexian spotlight, which actually makes sense because, again, that would have got boring. There's only so much body horror, metal plane things you can do.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway from this year, I think, in a kind of storyline relevance, because that's kind of where we focused on. Obviously, the artwork this year has been amazing, and we could do a whole other podcast about some of the amazing art that's come out. But every year they seem to be getting better. But this has been a big storyline year, and I think what has been proven is that WotC can do these big storylines that, if on the face of it is all you take from it, is like, well, they've done 2 sets of Phyrexians, then we're going to get another 2, then it's done. Well, that's like 4 sets, that's barely even a year. I think, no, little child. Look at what they've really been doing. Even if you were to just look at the cards, you could see a lot of it. Because they had cards of Vorinclex on, other than Vorinclex's own card in Kaldheim, for example. They have been building this up. And I think the payoffs are now coming through. And it's all just very exciting. Dominaria United did feel boring, but actually the story beats that happened in them, I think maybe it was the delivery that was the problem, not the actual things that they've done.
Yeah.
Like, it will matter. It will make sense. Characters do need to die and setups do need to happen. Like, it's, if you're going to be playing this game for more than 6 months, you need to just take your time. We are so affected by this new set, new release. And I know that's a problem of WotC's own creation, not of ours, because they keep pushing things. But we just need to all slow down, take things as they come, enjoy them for the time that they're here, because things will pop. Like next year especially, is looking, the first half looks fucking insane.
Yeah, it's going to be really, really cool.
It's going to be really cool. And I think this year has been a real nice, like, if 2021 was them kind of, like, plugging in the amp, and then this year is them doing a sound check.
Yeah.
It's been a good fucking sound check.
It's been a really good
and
sound
next
check.
year's gig is going to be wild.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think there's 2 ways to look at the game, right? There's the playing of it, and then there's the engaging with it. And I think I get where people feel inundated and feel overwhelmed is because you keep, with every set, you've got 250 new cards that you've got to try and find. Like, especially if you've only been playing for like a couple of years, you probably only have like maybe like 3 or 4 commander decks. You maybe have a couple of kitchen table standard decks. You maybe have a brawl deck or whatever, and it's really hard for you to justify taking in all of the different cards. And where am I going to put it? How am I going to play with it? There's all these cards that I want to play with, and you've got all the time in the world to play with these cards, right? It's all about. So that's one thing, and I can understand why people get a bit overwhelmed, because it's a lot to take in at once, and I barely have time. Every set I'll buy a bunch of cards, and I get back home after a few months, and I realise, God, I've got all of these cards and nowhere to put them. Why did I buy all of these? Whereas taking it from a lore perspective, and then also even from an art perspective, and just appreciating it as a piece of entertainment, I feel like that's a very different way than engaging it with the game. And I feel like that is something that I don't think you can complain too much about having too much of, because half of the sets for the year aren't relevant to the current story. And again, when you look at it on a grand scheme and see the arcs as they play out on a larger scale, I don't think they've done a poor job whatsoever. I feel like the build-up's great. I feel like each individual set has added another piece to the puzzle. We didn't even talk about how Halo could be used against the Phyrexians. There's so many weird little MacGuffins.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, the time Teferi's magic is seen through the eyes of Ren, is kind of an interesting thing. You're right, they are setting up all these little weapons.
Yeah. So it's how that's all going to play out, and how which ones are going to be subverted. Again, I like the fact that they played this Ajani sleeper agent thing, because then we don't know who else is going to be, and it's likely to be, because we've got this big smorgasbord Avengers Assemble moment at the end of the side stories, of where we have here's Nahiri, here's Luca, here's Tyvar, here's Kaito and the Wanderer. It's like, okay, which one of these are actually sleeper agents? Which one's going to get competing? That's the exciting thing, right? And I like the fact that we went into this. We're going now into March of the Machines, and it's half. You've got these 10 walkers that are going to be in the set. Half of them are completed, half of them are safe, and everyone's gone, fuck, which ones are going to be? I mean, again, they've kind of ruined it with the leaks a little bit, and you can kind of, I think at this point we kind of know everything pretty much, almost 99% surety, but it still created this kind of moment.
I had the exact same scratch card of predictions as Graham Stark from Loading Ready Run.
Nice.
So I'm kind of happy with that one.
Yeah.
All right, last little thing then to talk about,
Yes.
because this is always a good indication of how well a set was received, maybe play-wise, and also what grabs our attention as Vorthos. The new Commander decks that you built, because we are Commander players. I mean, last year, I always I don't build one a set, but if I was to look, say, at 2021, I did build a Belb deck. Well, that was technically 2020, isn't it, with Commander Legends?
Yeah.
At the very end. I built a Savai deck. I did build a Tovalar deck, for example. So I did, keep up with some of them. But this year, I had Ziatora for New Capenna.
Mm-hmm.
I built Caleb and Krug, which was Dominaria United. And Brothers War. I built Ivy from Dominaria United.
Yeah.
Now, Ivy, even when the card got released, that struck me. I don't know why. There's something about Ivy, the way they look, that makes them more Eldraine or even Ravnican. I don't know why.
being a fairy, you just don't expect fairies on
Dominaria,
Dominaria just aren't as that's not as prevalent.
Yeah, so I don't know why. I don't know, and they didn't have any storyline relevance. So I guess that's kind of really indicative of the set. That the card that I really picked up on was the exact legendary that has nothing. There's no story relevance. And although Raf Capuchin Ship's Mage is from Dominaria 2018, I built him exclusively to utilize the reality chip from Neon Kamigawa. Neon Dynasty
Kamigawa. Neon Genesis.
Yeah. I'll never get it right. So I'm counting that as a Kamigawa deck.
Yeah.
So I built like 1 for 1.
And it's amazing that, like, because given the time scale, and also we've probably not played as much this year as I think I've probably played less this year than I have in the last, I want to say 5 years.
Yeah, same.
Because of just, general life stuff. Obviously, I was out of the country for several months as well this year. And even then, we spoke about it during the time. I spent a lot of my time in Mexico. What I like to call was the season of Mardu, of where Ishin got released. And I couldn't figure out how to build him, so I built him 3 different ways.
Yeah.
I've now I got so angry with him. He's now an Alicia deck, but I think I'm going to come back round to Ishin. I also did a Ginny Faye deck from Nuka Penna. I did an Abdel Adrian deck from Baldur's Gate. I originally wanted it to be mono white, but I ended up using the Candlekeep Sage as a background because essentially it's kind of a rebuild of Brago without having douchey stacks effects in there. I did Hostile Takeover. I completely remodeled my favourite deck with Satoru Umezawa. Which was a much nicer version of the Steal Your Girl deck.
You'll change it again. You've had about 4 different commanders for that.
Yeah, so, yeah. And then Mirim, I did a Mirim deck because I missed playing dragons and I wanted some clone effects, and I dissolved my Simic deck. So yeah, we're looking at about 5 decks, one for each set.
I didn't do one for Baldur's Gate, I suppose, if you count that as a mainline set.
I don't. It's definitely a supplemental set, so you're fine. But yeah, I mean, clearly. The inundation didn't stop us building, didn't stop us playing.
Was it like 14% of all playable legends were released in?
Yeah, it was ridiculous. It's when you were saying about how Ivy didn't have any story relevance. It's like it's got to a point now where they keep making the what's it called? The signifier of the draft archetype signifier uncommons legendary creatures. So then every set you're guaranteed to have 10 new legendaries. And for something like Dominaria United, it makes sense. You've got a bunch of characters, and how else do you shoehorn them in without, making the red, black one Ghana,
and
making the green...
They still make half of the Weatherlight crew the fucking arena cards. We did get a card for each of them, and they did have storyline, the new Weatherlight crew, but half of them were digital.
Yeah.
Fuck that.
Yeah, I know. That's one thing that really annoys me about Arena, is it kind of hides some really cool effects, and some of them, again, don't work. Perpetual doesn't work, and blah, 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 blah. But it kind of annoys me that they hide one of the only good Davriel cards behind Arena, and same with Teo. There's the crappy uncommon version from War of the Spark, and then there's this kind of better version, mythic version online, and you can't play it in paper.
Oh, Teo of Verada. You were the only good thing to come out of those books.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, that was 2022.
Exactly.
We're only 2 weeks late. That's fine.
That's fine. I feel like it took that much time to have enough of a perspective on it.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see what's going to happen this year. I've no grandiose predictions. We know that Phyrexia is going to win in some fashion. We know the Realm Breaker is definitely going to be creating this multiversal highway. I guess the big thing that we need to think about is that Wizards has said there's going to be a massive change to Magic, and it's not just going to be story and lore, it's going to also have some mechanical relevance, and that scares me. Because it's whenever they try and do something big and new, because again, we've had a lot, for the last year, it's not that they've done anything big and new, but they've done a lot of stuff and all of it's worked. Do you need to do a shake-up to things? And if you do, what was your justification? Why did you feel you needed to? And how is it going to be delivered?
Well, all I'll say to that is, and I know there are people that would consider it a fail, one of the first times they ever did that was introducing Planeswalkers. And one of the more modern times they've done that is when they introduced sagas.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess vehicles as well. So I guess if it's one big grand type, then maybe, I mean, some people are predicting it's going to be planes. They're going to find a way to do like plane cards and try and make them kind of like almost like old school world enchantments. I think that the smart thing is that they will probably make planeswalkers no longer a planeswalker type. I think they'll be creature planeswalkers. And I think they'll probably be more low to the ground, and I think having a spark will just matter less. So I don't know. We'll see. It's intriguing and scary at the same time. And to be fair, we won't know until we get to the end of the Phyrexian arc what that's going to be anyway. So for now, I'm just excited to get back to New Phyrexia. I guess it's no longer New Phyrexia, it's just Phyrexia again.
Yeah, although, I don't know, there are some signifiers that it might not be totally Phyrexian.
Yeah, well, exactly. We know that the Mirrans are still around. I mean, again, it's going to be really cool going back to... Because we originally wanted to do an episode of Phyrexia Then and Now before we had any information about what Phyrexia now looks like. Unfortunately, again, the leaks have kind of scuppered that a little bit, and we've seen a fair amount of the set, or at least I have. So I have got a fair idea of how it looks now. But again, the story comes out today. I think we'll probably do the next episode, depending on how quick the stories come out. We might even end up doing a story breakdown fairly quick compared to our normal turnaround for it, because it might just be something we really need to talk about.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's a very exciting... it'll be a very exciting combination. There's a lot of moving pieces. They're going to handle it better than War of the Spark. They have to. There's no way you can handle it worse. So I'm excited to see how they handle all of these characters kind of coming together, what the subversions are, who are sleeper agents, who aren't sleeper agents, all of that kind of thing. I think it's going to be really cool. Again, with the bits that we've had from the last year, have been phenomenal, and if they can deliver on that final flourish for it, I think it'll be a great year for Magic.
Agreed. All right, let us know on our Twitter page at MT Flavouring what you think of 2022 and what do you think heading into year 2023. I know we've already had people chatting to us about it. Let us know what you think of us doing in-person records again, because this is the way it's going to be, I think. Mm-hmm. And yeah, hit us up on our email, mtflavouring@gmail.com. My personal Twitter is at AndyManface. Nathan's, yours is...
At the Fox in the Moon.
Get yourself an arrowboat. They're awesome.
Yeah, it's cozy as fuck.
It is cozy as fuck. I need to feed the fire a little bit. It was going quite nicely when we recorded, and now it's starting to die down, so I'll have to feed it. Yeah, other than that, thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.